Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're tackling something foundational in construction, the contract documents.
Right.
But we're going beyond just the main agreement. We're really digging into the conditions, general and supplementary.
Yeah, those are critical. The agreement gives you the headlines, you could say, who, what, when, where.
Okay.
But these conditions, that's the playbook. It's all about the how, the rights, the responsibilities, how the owner, contractor, architect all interact.
So understanding these is key to, well, managing the whole process and avoiding problems.
Absolutely essential. You need to know the rules of the game.
Okay, so let's start with general conditions.
Yes.
Our sources describe these as the standard rules.
Exactly. Think of them as the boilerplate, the standard operating procedures meant to apply to, most projects. The idea is to have a common framework so everyone knows the basic responsibilities and procedures. It sets out the rights and duties for the owner, the representative, often an architect, sometimes a CM, and the contractor.
And what kind of ground do they cover? Is it broad?
Oh, very broad. We're talking rights and responsibilities, definitely. But also how changes in the work are handled, payment processes, what happens with disputes or delays, all the big administrative stuff.
Right, the core mechanics of the project.
You got it.
Now, the sources mentioned these conditions show up in different ways, sometimes in the agreement, sometimes just notes on drawings.
Yeah, for smaller jobs, maybe. You might see the conditions folded into the main agreement or like a really basic note on a drawing, say a completion date.
Okay.
But honestly, for most projects of any real size or complexity, you're going to have a separate, pretty substantial document just for the general conditions. There's just too much ground to cover otherwise.
Makes sense. And standardized forms are common for these. Sounds efficient.
Very common, and for good reason. Using standard forms like those from the AIA or others means, well, first, people are often familiar with them. They've seen them before.
Less of a learning curve.
Exactly. And maybe even more importantly, these forms often have a long history of being interpreted by courts.
Legal precedent.
Precisely. That predictability is huge. It helps avoid disputes because there's already some understanding of what the clauses mean legally. The exception, as the sources note, is often public agencies. They tend to have their own bespoke forms.
Right. So speaking of standard forms, the AIA's A201 comes up a lot. Seems like the industry standard when an architect's involved.
It really is. The AIA A201, the 2017 version, is current, is probably the most widely used general conditions document in the U.S. for architect-led projects. It's been around in various forms for ages. People know it. Courts know it.
That familiarity in legal testing must be a big draw.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It provides a solid, well-understood baseline.
Our sources list out the 15 articles in the A201. Just looking at the titles, general provisions, owner, contractor, architect, changes, time, payment, dispute. It really shows the scope, doesn't it?
It does. It maps out the whole project journey. It starts with definitions like defining work with a capital W to mean the specific work under the contract. Then it lays out roles for the owner, contractor, architect, subs. Then gets into the practical stuff. Changes, time, payments, how to handle issues. It's comprehensive.
Let's maybe touch on a few key articles, like the sources do. Article 2, the owner. What kind of rights does that give them?
Well, a big one is the owner's right to terminate the contract for cause.
Okay, under what circumstances?
Things like if the contractor consistently fails to supply skilled workers or proper materials, or doesn't pay subcontractors, or ignores laws, or is just generally in major breach of the contract.
So, serious failings.
Yes. And it's important to note the contractor usually has termination rights too. Say, if work stops for a long time due to no fault of theirs, or if they aren't getting paid, it cuts both ways.
Provide some balance. Article 3, the contractor. What are their key responsibilities?
Big ones include being responsible for all their people, employees, subs, everyone doing the work. And crucially, if they knowingly do work that goes against codes or laws, they typically have to bear the cost of fixing it. They can't plead ignorance if they knew.
Accountability. Got it.
Yeah.
Then Article 4, the architect. What's their main role here?
Often, they're the owner's representative administering the contract. A really key function, especially for the contractor, is reviewing and certifying payment applications.
Right. Deciding how much work is done and approving payment.
Exactly. They assess the progress, check the quality, and then issue a certificate for payment. Or they have to explain why they're withholding certification.
Okay. And Article 5, subcontractors. Seems the owner gets some say.
Yeah, the contractor usually has to tell the owner who they plan to hire as subs. The owner can object, but usually only for a reasonable cause, raised promptly. And the contractor isn't forced to hire someone they themselves have a reasonable objection to either. It aims for qualified people everyone's okay with.
Makes sense. Now, Article 7, changes in the work. This
Ah,
feels like a big one.
yeah.
Projects always change, right?
Well, almost inevitably. So Article 7 confirms the owner can make reasonable changes, but it defines how. There are three main ways. First, change orders. That's the gold standard written agreement signed by owner, contractor, and architect, detailing the change, the cost adjustment, and the time impact. Everyone's agreed.
Clear. What else?
Second, construction change directives, or CCDs. This is where the owner and architect can direct a change even if the contractor hasn't fully agreed on cost or time yet. The work proceeds, and the cost-time adjustment is often determined later, typically by the designer.
That sounds like it could get tricky for the contractor.
It can be a risk, yes. They need to track costs carefully. And third, there are minor changes in the work. These are usually initiated by the architect and, crucially, don't affect the cost or schedule.
Okay, so different tools for different situations. The key being the owner can make changes without voiding the whole contract.
That's the core idea. Change orders reflect full agreement. CCDs keep things moving when agreement isn't immediate.
Got it. What about Article 9, payment and completion?
This spells out the payment cycle. Like, the architect generally has 7 days to review a contractor's payment application and either issue the certificate or explain why not.
7 days. Okay.
It also covers the final steps, the process for final inspection, and when the architect finds the work acceptable and the contract complete, they issue the final certificate for payment. That triggers the final payment.
Right. And Article 14, termination or suspension, we mentioned the owner's rights, but what about the contractors?
Article 14 covers that too. The contractor might terminate if, say, the work is stopped for 30 days straight for reasons outside their control, or if the architect isn't issuing payment certificates when they should be, essentially indicating the owner isn't holding up their end.
Protection for the contractor, too.
Yes. And finally, Article 15, claims and disputes. Sounds like it pushes for talking first.
It does.
Yeah.
There's usually a strong expectation, often a requirement, that the parties try mediation first to resolve claims. You typically need a formal written request to start that process.
Trying to avoid court, if possible. That's the goal. Mediation is usually faster and cheaper.
And beyond those specific articles, the sources say general conditions also cover things like delays, site cleaning, safety, insurance, bonds, fixing bad work.
Yeah, it's a whole operational manual. Insurance and bonds are huge, safety protocols, who cleans up what, how delays are handled. It's all in there.
Very thorough. But the sources also mention some criticisms of standard forms like A201.
They do. No form is perfect, right? Some argue certain terms, like maybe non-conforming work, could be clearer.
Ambiguity.
Potentially. Or that some clauses might clash with specific state laws. You always need to check that. And, some contractors feel that AIA forms might lean a bit towards protecting the architect's role.
So bias is a concern for some.
It's been erased. The main point is, even with a standard form, everyone, owner, contractor, architect, needs to read it carefully and understand what they're signing. Maybe get legal advice.
Absolutely. Which leads us nicely into supplementary conditions. If general conditions are the standard framework, what do supplementary conditions do?
They're the customization layer. They modify or add to the general conditions to make the contract fit the specific project.
Tailoring it.
Exactly. Because no two projects are identical. So you use supplementary conditions to address the unique needs of the job or the owner's specific requirements.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Let's say the owner is using a construction manager as their main rep, not the architect, to administer the contract day to day. The supplementary conditions would spell that out, modifying the roles described in the general conditions.
Okay, changing the players.
Or imagine building at an operating hospital. You'd likely have very specific rules in the supplementary conditions about work hours, noise limits, delivery routes, dust control, things far beyond standard practice.
Things unique to that sensitive site. Got it. The sources also mention liquidated damages often show up here.
Yes, that's very common. Liquidated damages are those pre-agreed amounts the contractor pays the owner for each day the project is late.
Penalties for delay.
Essentially, yes. While the concept might be in the general conditions, the specific amount per day and the exact conditions triggering them, that detail almost always lives in the supplementary conditions. It needs to be project-specific.
Because the owner's potential loss from delay varies project to project.
Precisely. It should be a reasonable estimate of actual damages, not just an arbitrary penalty.
So supplementary conditions offer a lot of flexibility. What other kinds of things might we find there? The sources listed quite a few.
Oh, all sorts. Specific procedures for if existing landscaping gets damaged, maybe? Or detailed rules for pedestrian safety around a site in a busy downtown area or near a school.
Uh-huh.
You might see requirements for more frequent or detailed progress reports than standard.
Well,
Maybe clarification on which permits the owner is getting versus the contractor.
yeah.
Special testing procedures beyond code minimums. Requirements for specific types of meetings, how often.
Really granular details.
Exactly. Even things like designated streets for worker parking or truck access to minimize neighborhood disruption. Anything important and specific to that job can be addressed.
So pulling it all together, we have the main agreement, the basic facts, then the general conditions, the standard operating procedures, and finally, supplementary conditions, the project-specific tweaks and additions.
That's a great summary. They work together. The general conditions provide the foundation. The supplementary conditions tailor it.
And all three are crucial parts of the contract package.
Absolutely. You can't fully understand the contract without understanding how the general and supplementary conditions shape the agreement and the project execution.
Yeah.
Ignoring them is asking for trouble.
It really highlights how vital understanding both the standard rules and the specific adjustments is for everyone involved in making a project successful.
Couldn't agree more. Clarity up front saves so much pain later.
Well, this has been incredibly illuminating, taking something that sounds dry like contract conditions and seeing how fundamental they are.
They really shape everything that happens on site.
It makes you think, doesn't it? How these pre-agreed rules, written down maybe months or years before ground is even broken, actually dictate so much about the physical spaces we end up using every day. What kind of unforeseen ripple effects might decisions made in those supplementary conditions have on how a building ultimately feels or functions? Something to ponder.
Definitely food for thought. The details matter.